Thank you very much, Ben. Hopefully people can hear me. Excellent. Well, firstly, apologies for not being there in person. I had intended to be, but unfortunately, I came out of isolation yesterday. My wife is still in isolation until tomorrow, so I thought it wise not to get the train down from York and potentially cause a few issues along the way. But it's great to be with you in this virtual format, which will probably build on some of the things I'm going to talk about during these slides. So initially, just in case some of you don't really know about KTN, you may even spot an immediate change to if you do know us, that the UKRI logo is now on my slide deck. So I guess this is a reflection of the change in resilience, or perhaps robustness, of our business model going forward. It was announced about 2 weeks ago that we are changing our business model slightly, and we've been brought in closer to be part of the UKRI family, alongside Innovate UK, who have been traditionally our main sponsor. So that's something we need to look at and build on further, but I haven't really got much to say on that at the moment, as it's still distilling through to us. But really, KTN, we're here to build networks. And hopefully in the rest of these slides, I'm going to talk about what I think the great role of networks is to help build resilience in agri-food and another sector that KTN are involved in. So we really are in this job to bring innovators and partners together, help them with opportunities which come to really game-changing, world-changing solutions. And hopefully, with some of the work that's been done around resilience, we can bring in some of that and demonstrate that with some of the other work that we've done. So to do this, like a lot of organisations, we have a purpose, and we're very much about creating diverse connections. We really see the strength in bringing people from different sectors, different skills together, to hopefully build that network that's really powerful and does make a change on a global scale, which I'd like to think some of the work that John and the group have been doing around this question around food systems and resilience is doing that and having that impact. So we can hopefully use the network to build out through that. We do it like a lot of people, with a lot of people around the country. Majority of us are home-based. Say there's over 200 of us across the country working in different sectors. So I represent the agri-food team. But we also have people with different technologies. So hopefully we have a matrix effect that will help cover things and bring the right people together, and have unusual conversations, etc., which would have been great if I could have joined you today. So I thought, if I'm going to talk about resilience and show examples of networks and some of the work that we've done with other organisations, we should really look at ourselves first. So as a network organisation, one of our key mechanisms that we've had prior to the pandemic was face-to-face events like the one you're having today. Like everybody else, we had the lockdown, we had to go online, we had to go to Zoom, and we're now in the process of trying to work out what the problem is, because clearly that wasn't robust with the circumstances we are. We were able to show some degree of recovery, like everybody else, moving to Zoom, getting used to things like, can you hear me? You're on mute. All those new sayings that we'll hear far too much these days, and hopefully I'm not going to use very much today. But for us, the future is to try and reorientate how we deliver events. We're going to look. We've already looked back at what our carbon footprint as a business was before the pandemic. Now, every time that we plan a face-to-face event, we have an in-house carbon calculator. So we're trying to look at ways of what the carbon footprint is of having that face-to-face meeting, and therefore we're using that measurements to be able to go forward and create ways that we can do it with a lower carbon footprint. And we're hopefully, as an organisation, going to come up with a plan about how we're going to become a net zero company as soon as we can. But obviously, face-to-face events is a real big thing for us. But there's been a positive to all of these things. By going onto Zoom, we've noticed that we have got a new audience, people that for one reason or another couldn't attend our events before, have attended online. We still need to delve deeper, whether that's accessibility, whether that's time management, or whether it's perhaps just people's difficulties in being face-to-face events. So we know going forward, we're going to have a hybrid model to keep that new audience and keep them entertained and engaged. But also the other positive, we certainly at very early doors saw a large increase in attendance, and generally we do see a better attendance. But obviously, there's still a lot to do. We're at early stages of that, but we are in that reorientation process to try and make our events more resilient and ultimately carbon neutral. So in our day-to-day lives, how do we do this? So I took out one of the case studies that we've worked on from the agri-food team point of view, and a very large project this was, and this is all about the UK's reliance primarily on soya as a protein into animal feed. So there was a competition through the Transforming Food Production competition, looking at ways that we could change the food system and how we deliver it. Everybody knows, insect protein, it looks a very interesting and valuable alternative to soya. But what we had was a lot of small pieces putting together. So through our network, we managed to bring people together to try and come up with the best consortium, the world-beating consortium that could move this opportunity forward to replace the reliance on imported soya primarily. So 15 organisations brought together to get nearly £6 million of Innovate funding, almost £10 million project, which is ongoing at the moment. It has some fantastic ambitions and aims to deliver, UK-based jobs and annual revenues. But the real important thing for us is that reduction of CO2 as we address the net zero challenges in government. But really, we're trying to look at it from the resilience point of view. If we can produce the proportion of the soya or alternative or other proteins that we need for our food system in generating animal feed, and in this case use insect protein, and we're not using primarily South American imported soy, that must make the food system more resilient. I mean, in some respects, reorientate it, which aligns with some of the work that the John team have been working at. Like all things, we're quite proud of what we did, but it's always nicer when other people that are involved in it reflect back and give you some praise around it. So again, this reflects into our purpose and our targets as a company to really, give some expertise, challenge people's thinking, and make their bids and their projects as good and as ambitious as possible. So the first one was there from Kieran at Intercycle, and then another key member in this consortium was Thomas from Baty, who again has his opinion on that and so forth. So that's the first example that I'm touching on. The second one is the general response to COVID. Unfortunately, there is a COVID theme through my talk, and that possibly refreshed by my experience in the last week or so suffering from it. But there was that response by the government. We had the furlough and other schemes, but there was this Sustainable Innovation Fund, which really, when you delve down into the reasons behind it, was resilience, to help a lot of companies and a lot of different sectors in the country have some funding to be able to change their business and recover or reorientate their business. So if we look at that in a little bit more detail, overall there was nearly £200 million of funding that came through and went through the Innovate mechanism. A number of you may well have been through that mechanism, or possibly other ones through UKRI, and you quite often, the things that we feedback to us from KTN is the time that it takes from project idea to submission through to actual signing of contracts and then starting that thing. The really great thing, another positive from the situation, was that this first competition, which started off as £10 million with up to 50k for people to look at the resilience and perhaps pivot or change their business. Within 6 weeks of that application, they had that money and they were able to go on, take those actions and controls and change. And that was a fantastic achievement to be able to change things and hopefully save some of those businesses. Of course, there was a massive level of interest. I think it was just over 6,000 applications to that first fund, which started off as 10 million and was actually increased to 20 million. But that level of interest was actually more applications than Innovate get for all their competitions in the previous year, just for one competition. So there was a lot of work done. And I'm going to show you an example of that. And really, this is a bit, I was hoping to interact with you. I was going to ask you the question of what do these have to do with COVID, and that's relating to the two pictures on the side of this. So the top picture is trying to reflect on the flour. If you cast your minds back to the start of lockdown, there was a lot of home bakers suddenly appeared, and you just could not get a bag of flour. As we know, the sort of 2.5 kilo bag of flour to do your home baking. Now, it's fair to say that the flour production system, or to produce the actual raw material flour, was robust. That was not affected by the pandemic. There was still plenty of flour for everybody. The issue was that the 2.5 kilo bag that you'd have in your kitchen cupboard, because of that demand and everybody baking at home, you simply could not get it. There simply wasn't in that format. Some of you may even still have the larger catering, 25 kilo sacks somewhere in your kitchen. That was the thing that people went to. The system just wasn't there to be able to put the flour in the format that we wanted with that sudden change in buying habits. So that was one thing I was going to touch on there. The other one was the eggs. Again, another thing that suddenly went strange. We were all cooking at home. There was no longer the need for the liquefied eggs that we see going into bakeries who had the 25 kilo sacks. We all wanted those shells eggs in our house, in our homes. And the thing that you may have noticed that the cardboard box for eggs suddenly, well, it didn't quite vanish, but there weren't as many of it. It was replaced by the plastic boxes that we had a number of years ago, before the real drive to remove single-use plastics. The issue there was there wasn't enough cardboard, so it was easy enough to move from liquid egg to shell egg, if you're taking away a step, if anything, but it was that packaging for the end user. So again, we look at the system, there was enough eggs being produced, that was robust enough, but the actual final step to the consumer was not robust enough and had to go into recovery mode, if you like. And that recovery mode was going from cardboard, which is viewed as the greener, more sustainable option, back to the plastics. But the simple only way that the demand could be met to feed people was to go back to plastics. So that's what I was trying to get that point around, that certain parts of our food system, when challenged, were very robust, but certain steps in it certainly weren't as robust as that. So this takes me on to a short video I'm just about to play, which explains one of those projects to try and to resolve that issue around the flour.
Flour to the People was born out of the scenes that we saw at the beginning of lockdown, of flour disappearing, bread disappearing off of shelves. And obviously, as a flour mill, and as a small flour mill as well, Scotland Bread was hit by that overwhelming demand for flour. And so there was a desire to increase the capacity of the mill so we could produce more, but also to work with community food hubs who are already working in vulnerable communities, making fresh, local, nutritious produce available to the people who need it most.
These are the original wheats that we saved from seed banks. They're from the 1800s, very old Scottish varieties. And what we've done last year is to grow the three of them together as a mixture in the field. Because they're old varieties, they haven't been bred to have a really strong gluten. And it's really important at the minute because so many people are becoming gluten intolerant. And actually we're saying, well, maybe it's something to do with the kind of wheat that we're growing and how we're growing it and how we're baking the bread itself.
Our flour comes from organic farming methods, and the way that we mill it as well is very low energy consumption. It's a cyclone mill which just makes much finer flour and keeps all of the nutritious bran in it, so it's much more multi-purpose. So there's innovation in the side of the technology itself, but I think also innovation in the way that we're looking at the supply chain.
There are a lot of people who say you can't grow wheat in Scotland because traditionally we've always thought you need a really long, hot, dry summer. And that's why lots of the wheat that we eat in this country is imported from Kazakhstan or Canada or Ukraine. But we're trying to say, actually, we can grow wheat in Scotland. We've done it and we've made it into flour, and working with our community partners, they've baked it into really nutritious bread for their communities. Revitalising the rural economy as well as the sort of sustainable economy in general is really important to us.
Flour to the People is a perfect example of a project for Innovate UK to support. It's small scale, it's in a traditional area, but it's using modern technology to increase productivity, and it's part of the things that Innovate UK do to support the innovation that's taking place here.
I hope that this project inspires a lot of people to try baking at home, but what we really aim with Flour to the People is to introduce that notion of you can be healthy from using a different flour, from eating real bread produced in a really incredible way.
Okay, so hopefully that had a number of different resilience aspects to it, with the alternative grains and obviously trying to change the production system to meet that demand. When I spoke to John about this call, he was very keen that I stepped away, if you like, from my comfort zone in the agri-food team and brought up some examples of resilience from other sectors that we work in. So I've got one here. And this built on some work that one of my colleagues started probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it was looking at the aviation sector and that real think about, okay, they cannot carry on, their carbon footprint is far too high. They're going to have to look at alternative fuels. So she pulled some work together, started building things together, and that eventually created Jet Zero. So there's a Jet Zero Council, which was a high-level council built just over a year ago now, influenced by Grant Shapps and Alicia Gretton, our chief exec, who was initially down to do this talk but unfortunately couldn't make it, sits on that council. So that is all about getting biofuels into aviation to help them improve their carbon footprint. So fantastic bit of work, and you may well have seen in the news in the last, I think it was last week now, British Airways signing a deal with somebody to take this forward. So it really has taken traction. So that's a great way of looking at a business and almost challenging their resilience. If you rely on fossil fuels going forwards, you may not have a business that you really want. So you need to look at different ways to change that and reorientate it. So that was the background to it. Through that, further funding came through in the Future Flight Challenge, which is a long-term program looking at other areas in the aviation to do that. But again, with that COVID theme that I'm unashamedly using, when this happened and all of a sudden it's how do we get things around the country? How do we move things about? There was a lot of consultation through KTN and some of those networks that we've done. So again, it's come back to that theme of how networks can help build resilience. Consultation, and 15 products ended up. And what happened in the end was looking at ways of moving PPE, test kits, etc., around the country. And one of the big ones that came out that from this was the Royal Mail and their pioneering work in being first trials to use large-scale drones, in this case to take personal protective equipment and test kits, etc., from the mainland over to the Scilly Isles to help them with that, and obviously try and minimise the spread of the COVID disease. So it's been a real whistle stop. I know I haven't got very much time, but I really wanted to come back to this networking thing. I truly believe, and it's obviously my job to believe, so I am biased, that using networks, communicating with people in different sectors, different skills, really can bring extra value to any work you're doing, and hopefully by looking at the resilience of a business or a sector and those networks and learning from other networks, you can do it a lot better or have a lot more impact. I've put a quote up here, just bringing it back to agri-food. And it really is networking. To a lot of people, it's very natural. To some people, it's not so natural. And to some people, it's really, really scary. I'd just like to encourage people to do network. Obviously, being there today around your tea and your cakes, so you're hopefully having those conversations. But really, if you are scared of networking, have a think about it again. It's not really as scary as you think. Let's face it, if you have a leak at home, quite often you'll ask somebody, can you recommend a plumber? That's networking. You may be in a new town or city and you don't know where to go and eat, which restaurant. You'll look on TripAdvisor or something like that, and you'll take recommendations from that. That's networking. That's what it is. It's about talking to people, sharing that. But really, that whole message on it, when you are networking, think about it as farming. It may not come off for you today. It's about planting things, building that relationship, building that conversation. Certainly don't be, hunting and kill it. Networks for a long time. So, Ben, I think I've used my time up. I've left my contact details on there. I'm around to take any questions. I'd have loved to have been there in person, so sorry I can't do that. But hopefully I've given you that impression that networking is good. It can be fun. I know it can be daunting, but hopefully by using networks and thinking about resilience, you can really make a difference to people's lives and really keep the UK at the forefront of science and innovation. So thank you very much for listening to me from my spare bedroom in York.
So across, you were talking about networking, the value of networking. How can our food resilience community better network with the other bits of KTN that pertain to the food system, for instance, the whole transport community and the like? Is that something that KTN could foster?
In a simple answer, yes. The mechanism for doing it, it would be a conversation to start off with, and then we'd have to build up a way and work around it. But certainly there is a lot of things and value things that we could do to try and improve the whole system. And as we all know, and it's been said many times, it's very complex, it's very divergent, but yes, we should talk to more people and try and make it happen. But I guess it's like a lot of things in a sector where margins are pretty small. It's trying to find the time, the appetite, and the business permission almost to make it happen. But we're certainly here and keen to help in any way to make it happen.